welcome everybody. We are about to start. Thank you so much for being here today for this exciting conversation where we hope to share everything that we have learned over the last 10 years building Bitwise Industries. So let's get officially started. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to our conversation today. My name is Laura Maristani and I'm a Bitwise Industries Vice President of External Affairs and have the honor of helping to navigate this conversation with all of you today. So thank you again. We're really excited to have several folks across Bitwise Industries that are going to be speaking to how government can effectively invest in underserved communities via paid technology apprenticeships. A very special thanks to Code for America for the partnership as we seek to highlight a successful model to increase digital equity across our communities. These days, everybody is talking about digital infrastructure, but what does that really entail? Expanding internet access and meaningful access to technology doesn't just happen because we literally put fiber or somewhere. The answers to what it will take to bring all people in our nation into the digital economy lie in places like Fresno, where the most disconnected and underserved communities live. It is in places like Fresno, California, Merced, California, Bakersfield, California, Oakland, Toledo, Ohio, El Paso, Texas, Las Cruces, New Mexico, Buffalo, New York, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Greeley, Colorado, that we are hoping to serve. How does a city like Fresno develop a powerhouse tech economy? I will give you a hint. It starts with people. Specifically, it starts by seeking to engage untapped and often underestimated talent and making those the stories that anchor a technology ecosystem. During our session today, key leaders across Bitwise Industries will talk more about how Bitwise has built a tech economy in Fresno and how the model, anchored in equity, is now put in service to 10 cities across the country. We'll be hearing from Bitwise Industries President Beth Milley, Chief Workforce Officer Michelle Score, and Senior Vice President for New Economies, Jonathan Hollyfield. Our hope is to provide you with what we have learned, bringing people into high road jobs, while strengthening digital infrastructure across the most underserved communities so that you too can learn from and adapt strategies in your own cities and communities to increase representation, inclusion, and belonging in technology. You've heard this a lot during the pandemic. Cities across America have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to strengthen infrastructure to help our communities thrive, with investments coming from ARPA, other COVID response, federal dollars, state surpluses, and now the Infrastructure Jobs Act. That opportunity has become, again, once in a lifetime. But the bigger opportunity here is to build infrastructure that directly addresses systemic barriers to equity for the most vulnerable. And while there's increased recognition of persistent racial, ethnic, and other systemic disparities, and more awareness of their negative effects on local economies, there's much less understanding on how to actually address systemic issues that keep untapped talent untapped. So I would like to invite first up Beth Milley, Bitwise Industries President, to start and give us just an overview of the model and what Bitwise Industries has been able to build in Fresno, California. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Laura. Really great intro. Appreciate that. Thank you for taking some time to help us with the moderation today. As Laura so eloquently put, Bitwise really is about equity and access for folks looking to enter the technology industry. And in most cases actually, the opportunity is offered for individuals who did not think of technology as a possibility for themselves before. So our model consists of going into underestimated cities, places that don't have a tech economy to speak of at the moment. So places like Fresno, California, Bakersfield, California, Toledo, Ohio, and accessing the community there to bring folks into tech, give them the skills and tools they need to be successful, and then create a thriving tech community in that space with assistance from other partners and other organizations looking to bring equity and access and opportunity to those cities. So really briefly, Bitwise does this in 3 parts. One is creating community. So we go into downtowns, find blighted properties, rehab those properties to create exciting and interesting and vibrant places to work. And then we lease that space to ourselves and to other folks in the community working in technology. That creates a density of place and an exciting spot for folks to go in and go to work every day. So in addition to offices, in our buildings, we also have things like gyms and coffee shops and eateries and arcades and just really exciting and fun places for the community to work, live, and play, essentially. So that's piece 1. Piece 2 is our software development firm. So we win work from all over the world in applications, software, websites, whatever the case may be, whatever technology solution government or private industry is looking for, we can build. And then the most important piece that we do, piece number 3, is our technology training. So we bring in folks from all over the community, excuse me, to work on this work for our software development firm, starting with pre-apprenticeship and moving into paid apprenticeships where students are given full-time jobs, benefits, 401k plans to essentially be paid to learn. So they're taken under the wing of our technology support folks and senior level developers to give them training and the support they need, which includes wraparound services like childcare and transportation and other really important services that folks would need in order to be able to set the life things that happen in the experiences and daily lives of our students, set those aside, make sure that they are taken care of, children are taken care of, food is on the table, we're able to pay a wage for folks to live and work, and then we can help support their learning on the other side of that. Taking them all the way through a variety of different projects to help build a portfolio and a body of work to get them into jobs in the technology industry after. And those jobs and apprenticeships range in a variety of topics from Salesforce to cybersecurity to web and application development. Importantly, the folks that are taking advantage of these programs are individuals that make up the community at large. So whatever the makeup of that particular community is in Toledo, Ohio, or Fresno, California, it's important to us that the tech folks that we support are representative of the community in which we're serving.
Boom, boom.
You're muted, Lauda.
I love it. It had to happen. Thanks, Beth. So leveraging public-private partnerships, Bitwise builds digital infrastructure in underestimated cities while creating a representative tech workforce. Key to this model are obviously our apprentices, which Beth started to talk about. So Michelle, can you chime in here and talk more about Bitwise and how we are building digital equity in cities across the country? And say a little bit about what specific audiences we're working with, and what kinds of tools are we employing to be able to reach that untapped talent across our communities?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lauda and Beth, for the overview and the introduction. I think let's start by talking about, for us, in defining digital equity. It's a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in society and democracy in our economy. We believe that it's necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. The way that we anchor that inside of Bitwise is a lot of community partnerships. So to Lauda's point, the communities that we serve in these often overlooked cities, or where you maybe don't think about as tech hubs across the US, ensuring that in those communities we're connected to folks that are working with veterans, folks that are working with, in recent years, people who have been impacted in employment due to COVID-19. We know that women identified individuals have exited the workplace in larger numbers due to the COVID pandemic. And so reaching out to organizations and community groups where we know they're already connected to these communities, LGBTQ plus groups, as well as a reentry population. So working with organizations where we are boots on the ground, understanding the barriers that exist from systemic poverty that often exists in these overlooked and intentionally underserved communities, and partnering to understand what individuals need to be able to take a first step towards reskilling or upskilling to employment in the technology industry. We focus on digital equity, and we believe that can be achieved by upskilling people who are literally closest to the problem that technology is meant and aimed to serve. In our Bitwise workforce training model, we do that by reaching this untapped talent and what Beth was speaking to earlier, removing barriers. Folks that may not have reliable transportation, that may need dependent care support, that might need food or housing security in order to make that first step into an upskilling or training program. We call these at Bitwise our student wraparound services, and those happen from the first moment of connection and outreach into those communities. Getting first connected to our community outreach coordinators, where the conversation begins about what might be a challenge or a barrier for that individual student. It carries with them through our student support services in the time that they may be on our pre-apprentice journey with us. Those are 6-week courses where folks are learning website for beginners, mobile friendly, JavaScript or React, readying for the apprentice moment in their training pathway. The apprenticeship for us, which Beth was sharing, is a paid apprentice model. I want to emphasize here that we believe deeply that you need to pay people to learn. These folks are 40 hours a week, paid full time, benefited, medical, 401k, and employees during the time that they are in their apprenticeship program. The uniqueness of the apprenticeship model within Bitwise is that is it attached to the technology consulting work that comes in via our delivery team inside of the tech consulting business within Bitwise. These React apprentices are amoebaed around senior React developers doing learning on the technology consulting projects that are in-house. This gives them a portfolio of work at the end that is based on public and private sector work. And we know that these folks are entry-level ready for employment because we know what it takes to hire an entry-level React developer or a Salesforce administrator or someone to run call center as a service. And we believe that the ecosystem inside of training is to support the learner all along their journey as they're readying for the high wage, high growth jobs.
All right.
Thank you, Michelle, for that summary. And obviously that doesn't even begin to cover just the depth of the program and how it really is helping to navigate folks. And I just shared in the chat for those interested and want to follow along some of the data, link to our white paper, which has more information on some of those outcomes, and just pulling out a thread from that information. A lot of the students Michelle is talking about, a lot of the students that Bitwise is working with are actually over 24 years old. So they are folks that are left out of traditional pathways into the workforce. One really interesting point that we saw when we surveyed our students and former apprentices is that after they have that psychological safety, they have a job, they have a salary, they actually end up deciding to go and further their education. And so really meaningful cycle how these folks are coming into these programs and in many cases tripling their salaries. So Jonathan, Bitwise has been leading the way in Fresno since 2013. So we feel pretty confident that our model works. We've successfully built a tech ecosystem in Fresno that has served over 8,000 students. And some years ago, the company decided to try to take this success story to more cities across the country to be able to serve more people. And so, Jonathan, you help Bitwise identify new cities. So can you share some background on that strategy and what city leaders can do to attract similar economic development engines to their own towns?
Absolutely happy to, and happy to be here with you and our Bitwise colleagues and share a bit. What you're learning is that Bitwise is both a head and heart company. And the head, and when we assess new cities, underestimated cities, we have empirical data. At least 12 socioeconomic indicators, the usual things: median household income, poverty rate, the absence of a top 50 research institution, diversity, walkability, etc. Those are empirical data. It informs, but it doesn't control our expansion decisions. We also have the heart element, what we call gravitational pull. And as we're exploring in new cities, do we get the sense that a diverse collection of stakeholders from community to corporate suites and everything in between are really genuinely interested in Bitwise being a part of their story? If we get that warm feeling, boy, we go all in and really begin to explore how we can be a contributing member to this community. It's very important. I appreciate my colleague Michelle's description of digital equity. What I think it comes down to is ownership. We talk about equity a lot in the sense of fairness, but what Michelle describes is empowering people with ownership of valuable assets that tie them to the local economy and give them an underlying ownership interest, just like kind of an equity partner in a law firm or an equity partner in a company, an ownership interest in the destiny of their community. So when we expand, we're looking for that kind of energy, that kind of passion, and we have the kind of team where we explore and meet that passion, if not exceed it with the passion of our own. In terms of the kind of cities where we have the most success, those underestimated cities, the ones that we have consistently and successfully deploying our model, I would say for local public and private sector leaders, I'll ask a single question. What's the local policy? What's the local policy? If we're waiting for underestimated populations to demand Bitwise type opportunities, that is unfair, because many of these opportunities are completely invisible to those who are disconnected from them. But those of us who know better have a duty to offer more. And if the policy, and that doesn't mean legislative policy, if an important public objective in that community is to improve economic outcomes, increase social mobility, then we must offer the kinds of opportunities that actually create social and economic mobility. And Bitwise and the tech economy provides those elastic opportunities, not the inelastic opportunities, but elastic opportunities that provide a career of growth and increased earning and, frankly, increased empowerment. So I'd ask a fundamental question. What's the policy? Oh, yeah. Investment never precedes the expression of policy. Never. So ultimately, if we want to get to investing in underestimated populations, first we must be clear about what our objective or our policy is. So local leaders, what's your policy?
Thanks, Jonathan. And that's exactly right. And I think a big part of the Bitwise ecosystem is that in many of the communities that we are seeing a lot of energy right now, there have been significant investments in thinking through those policies. We all know, as we were talking about earlier in the conversation, that there are historic investments across the country, once in a lifetime investments across the country to bring people meaningfully into the digital economy. But that is not just making sure that there's Wi-Fi and fiber in the air. We need to be purposeful about how we're going to bring people that are disconnected into the digital world. And so, to that end, one of the things that Bitwise really focuses on, and one of the pieces that we have to integrate anytime that we consider going into a new city, is that we know we're going to have to increase demand for that technology. Obviously, that includes public-private partnerships and working closely with government to make sure that, to Jonathan's point, we have the policies in place that are going to support that ecosystem, working closely with digital equity coalitions, other community organizations. But the piece around increasing that demand, and what we're specifically talking about, is demand for better technology so that all of the sectors across our communities can create more inclusive platforms that are bringing people meaningfully in. So to that end, I'm going to ask Beth, to learn on the job, there have to be jobs. And so Bitwise is a tech consulting and software development company. So paired with senior developers, our apprentices work on those projects across their communities. So Beth, can you say more about the technology solutions we provide and how they are put in service of our cities and government entities across the country, and particularly around, examples of how who is behind the technology matters so much when you're trying to create inclusion across the communities we serve.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura, for that intro on the topic. But just to kind of put a bow on it quickly, there are a number of projects that we have worked on for government entities, local, state, federal, and I'll talk about those in just a minute, but want to make sure that Laura's point about the vehicle in which we use to sort of get to the end result is highlighted here. And that is putting a number of senior level and apprentice level folks on this work. So not only are we creating really great technology solutions for a variety of levels of government, but we're also helping to put a diverse workforce and underestimated and underserved population to work. So that is a really key component of our model, creating both great products and then also helping underserved folks get the skills they need to take advantage of the technology industry. So just a couple of samples. We've done a number of projects in the city of Fresno for both the city and the county. As Laura mentioned, we started here in 2013, so we've got a greater history in Fresno than in some of the other cities. Some of the things that we've done here, we did an app that helped support sort of anti-recidivism. It connected reentry populations with really important support services that would help keep them out of returning to prison. So that has been a great app for the Superior Court and County of Fresno. In the city of Bakersfield, we built a web application that the administrators of the city could put in goals and stats and important notes about the city and about how the city was meeting the goals that visitors could log on to and take a look at. For Fresno Unified School District, They had a legacy system that was not web-based. So we went in and built the front-end web-based application to that. Really just a number of different projects to help update the city or county sites to make them just more user-friendly and more efficient.
That's wonderful. And Michelle, there's a number of other projects, one in particular that Bitwise developed in response early on to the COVID pandemic and specifically the shutdowns when people were forced to stay at home. So can you talk a little bit about Onward and what it did across the country, where it is, where's it going?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks for the intro, Lauda. And I dropped information in the chat where you can find out more about Onward, both at onwardus.org and see the very first state that we launched, onwardcalifornia.org, Onward CA. The point before I drop into Onward specifically that I want to tie into, and I suspect there's a good amount of folks who know or who want to do this work in government differently. And I want to tie two really important threads here. And that is how we think about the entry point of someone being having the skills necessary to be a technologist serving on public sector work. And I want to say that we know Lauda and I both work very closely with US of Tech. You've probably heard a few folks over time speak at the summit. And that we know there's a great need for technologists at the federal, at the state, at the city and county levels that aren't being met by folks who have the technology skills in order to serve those public sector technology needs. And a great example of this, so I'll talk about Onward and I'll talk about what a specific barrier looks like. Onward was launched early on in the pandemic when we knew or guessed that state websites would be deeply impacted looking at resources or jobs in order to serve people who were immediately dislocated from work due to COVID-19. Entire industries shut down. A lot of folks in hourly retail service work as we went to shelter in place. These are folks for whom are not going to LinkedIn to find their next job, aren't going to a job board, but who maybe found their job in their community, talking to a neighbor, talking to a cousin, working in a family business. And the Onward platform was built to connect a dislocated worker to three things. And this is based on the Bitwise ethos and model. And that is to connect people to essential life services. Immediately, how do you have access to emergency money? How do you have access to health and well-being, rent services, childcare services? So those are essential life services. The second component is training and reskilling programs. And so we partnered with state agencies, local workforce boards to understand what programs and reskilling opportunities were available to individuals who maybe needed a moment to have a skills that had a skills gap, that would need a training moment in order to land next employment. And then jobs that were focused on hourly wage earning work that was someone's next employment, where that skill or retraining might help them be a pathway into what their next job might be. All of that was built on the Onward platform. We stood up Onward California in 14 days, and that platform was built in large part by our Salesforce apprentices. It was also built by a team of data collection folks who we accessed via the communities that we served at the time, Fresno, Oakland, Bakersfield, Merced, that were contributing on that project. And I highlight that because a piece that both Beth and I have said earlier is those folks were also closest to the problem, helping us build the technology that was aimed to serve them. And I think that's a really important component, that oftentimes we think you need a degree from a four-year institution in order to be in a productive technology role. And for us, we are always looking for a term that Beth Millie uses. How do we screen people in instead of screen people out of that system? So I think looking for governments at where are those systemic barriers to both projects in California? Do you have apprentices included in your procurement as a job category? Are there ways and levers that you can access that will create a more diverse and representative workforce that's building these technology solutions by looking at apprenticeship or other pathways into those opportunities?
Thanks, Michelle. And again, to Jonathan's earlier point, right? Like it all starts with policy. And I think we have an enormous opportunity right now to do this right, especially with a lot of the investments that are going down to the local level, the flexibility that cities and counties and regions have right now to really build for that economy of the future. And to that point, I want to bring Jonathan back in here. And everybody's trying to crack the nut. We've said it again and again. There's all these dollars. You would think, our cities are always starved for resources. But now that we're seeing that cities that have a lot of resources, there's this question of where do we put them? What do we do? How do we do this right? And so I wonder, Jonathan, if you can chime in here and say, do you have any advice for cities on how to strengthen digital infrastructure in their communities while incentivizing economic development that is anchored in equity?
Well, of course, I have advice. Absolutely. I have a lot of advice, endless advice. But really, seriously, in my background, can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where a lot of good talking communities, big time policymakers, community activists, business leaders, government leaders, and then someone will pound the table and say, we all know what the problems are. Let's just go out there and get to work. And we all run out and do the same thing we've always done. For anything serious in community life, it never happens like that, except when it comes to inclusion, digital equity, and the kinds of things we're talking about. Why can't we apply some of the same fundamentals to create better conditions for the success of the kind of people that we're talking about, underestimated folks, right, in these communities? The great Chinese military philosopher Sun Tzu said, the victorious army first secures conditions for victory, then seeks to do battle. And the losing army first seeks to do battle, then secures conditions for victory. That's a key piece. What are the conditions for victory? What's important in that community? Who says it's important? What's the investment behind it? And when this rises to that level, then you get the kind of outcomes that we've achieved, Bitwise has achieved in Fresno and will achieve in the other expansion cities. Let's not make up a whole bunch of new rules. Some of the same kinds of investment, some of the same kinds of condition creation that led the first and second movers can also bring along underestimated people. We don't have to lose our minds and be racked with uncertainty like we don't know what to do. Yes, we do. We just need to extend reasonably good practices that have worked reasonably well in the first and second instance to the third instance. And that third instance is underestimated populations accessing technology opportunities, providing the kind of social and economic mobility that everyone on this call would like to see. So that's my quick 2 cents, probably more like 5 cents of counsel.
Before that's amazing, Jonathan. Thank you for that input. And so before we transition on that same note, I would like to invite Beth and Michelle to jump in here and just tell folks if there was 1 or 2 things from a policy standpoint that you would do or change across the country to facilitate scale of such an economic development engine anchored in equity. What would you say? And Michelle, why don't you jump in here and then we'll have Beth.
Yeah, I think I was looking at, back to my point earlier, what's keeping people out, right? What's the
Oh,
reassessment at each level
yeah.
of how we're looking at, and there's a question in the QA to this point, how to reach underserved folks for apprentices, how to reach out in those communities, and not to be specific or not to be basic about it, but to do that very thing, to go out into communities, to work with community organizations who are already doing that work, and to Jonathan's point, to understand what's the policy in that city. What can you do to advocate and change the work that's happening there in order for there to be more, not less, access points for entry, both for training providers, for the public sector technology solutions, and for the folks that you want representative of the communities that you're in and serving to be supporting those technology solutions.
Beth, any thoughts? You're on, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, Laura. I was typing a response to a question in the chat, so I didn't catch your question. Can you repeat it?
So just if you have any thoughts on how to go at the policy piece, like what would be your recommendations on what decision makers across the country should be doing to be able to scale economic development engines and models like Bitwise from a policy standpoint?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think there are lots of things that we have encountered throughout our time at Bitwise where it would be nice if there was a specific policy that helped us to do this work better, more efficiently, easier, I might even say. But one that comes to mind is really just an understanding that pulling people out of poverty and giving them access to opportunities is not an inexpensive endeavor. So I think a lot of times when we have worked with government, and I understand it, they're trying to make the largest impact for the least amount of dollars. And when you're working with populations who can't afford to step away from a full-time job, to learn a new skill, to eventually get to a high-paying job, we've got to make some changes at that level. To give people the opportunity to make a living wage while they are learning is really the best way to do this. So if there are more opportunities from the government side to recognize that this is an expensive kind of endeavor, but it pays out dividends in the end, meaning that you now have folks who are working in the industry, have good paying jobs, have benefits, have 401k, all of those things that we really care about as a country. And they are also helping to set that example for their children and that next generation. That is really, we think, how you change systemic poverty. It's by taking folks where they are right now, paying them to learn, and then watching the fruit come to bear, so to speak. But it is a longer process to change systemic poverty and doesn't happen with very little dollars. So it really takes an entire community, takes lots of dollars, and it takes lots of wraparound service support to get folks where we need them to be. But it is an investment that truly will end up paying off in the end.
Louder.
Yep.
Bethany hit the nail on the head. You know, we all know what tipping points are. When momentum goes downhill and the community tips, it's people tips. Well, there's a concept called transformation points, which means you have to meet that tip with an equal, perhaps slightly more upward momentum or level of investment to actually turn it. But to transform, you have to add a different kind of opportunity. Tip, turn, transform. We provide turn and transformation with new kinds of opportunity that provide those pathways to social and economic mobility.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Well said.
Really great. Well said. So we are turning over. If folks have questions, we're going to take about 10 minutes to address those. And we have one in the chat, which I think is an excellent question. So Ken and Beth started to answer it. But can you say more about how we're able to reach underserved folks to come into our programs? And I'll just chime in from a government relations standpoint. So, we have a lot of grassroots and grass tops across the country. And one of the points that we get a lot, especially when we're sharing so much about our model and the work that we do, is that we don't think equity and doing equity and inclusion is proprietary information. And we also, and so we want to show it, we want to share it with the world. So that piece is really important. But to answer the part of the question, and then obviously Michelle and Beth have a lot more to add here, that we do a lot of coalition building with the organizations on the ground that are the most trusted community partners. So Bitwise, we know what we do well in our communities, and we just want to be the best partner out there to all of the other organizations that are working directly on the issues and with the people that are outside of these opportunities. And so I'll pass it on. I don't know, Michelle, if you want to jump in here first and say a little bit more about how we do that, how we find those folks that are outside of those traditional paths into the workforce.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Tia, Lauda. And I think Beth put that there is a reply from Beth in the Q&A, but we literally do that very thing in the community. We go to coffee shops. We work with migrant farm family community organizations. We host taco nights. A big place a piece of our model that you heard Beth talk about earlier is place-based. We do that because we want people who are interested in this training program, where we're reaching out and inviting them into our doors to see people who maybe share a lived experience, who look like them inside of our buildings doing that very work. And so for us, a lot of it is very, very boots on the ground, whether or not we're working with a local workforce board on industry sector prioritization and the hiring and programmatic outreach that they might be doing, whether it's working with high schools in the cities that we serve. And we know a lot of these communities already have alternative education pathways for individuals. So how might we partner there and get folks ready for what might be an apprenticeship journey with us, and how do we evangelize and talk about what does a career in technology even look like? What might it take for you to sit in that seat and learn those skills and become a technologist? Or whether or not that's showing up at a swap market or a flea market, or the places where we can have a presence, where we're both meeting people where they are, but we're also doing some trust building with those individuals in those communities and sharing more about, again, what the opportunity is and what a role in technology might look like.
Michelle, could you talk about who actually performs the work? They're not Californians going to Ohio.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Onward California was built by Californians, right. Many of them in large part, these communities we're talking about, and very specifically in the moment we stood up that solution, themselves dislocated from work due to COVID-19 that we invited in to help us build this product and technology solution. As we hit this incredibly interesting moment about what remote work looks like and what made possible, for us, it's still being built by and for the people in the community where these technology solutions are serving. So Onward California being built by dislocated California workers, and in Toledo or in New Mexico, standing up a call center around digital broadband efforts from the state there, by folks that are living in the communities in New Mexico. Important point. Thanks for calling that out.
Well, we've reached time for folks again joining us. We're so grateful to get the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about the Bitwise ecosystem. We shared some links with contact information. Please feel free to reach out. And thanks again, Jonathan, Michelle, and Beth, for sharing your experience and feedback and thought. We'll see you all soon.
All right. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.